There we are. We're good. Okay, sweet. All right. For all of those of you out there in Facebook world, I'm Dr. Cheryl Luther. This is Dr. Jenn Hatfield, and we are here talking about intuition and creativity today. And this is Dr. Jenn's specialty. And so I can't wait to see where this conversation goes today. So first and foremost, you're located in the Carolinas, yes?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so you're Eastern Standard Time, so am I, up in Canada. And and how did you get into intuition and creativity? How did you get those two worlds to collide, and how are you navigating space these days with creativity and intuition?
Well, that's a great question. How did I get them to collide? I didn't. I feel like when it really comes down to it, there were ideas, thoughts, questions that I had, things that I was looking for in response to what myself and my patients were experiencing in my chiropractic practice, and that weren't being answered by like a chiropractic adjustment, but yet I knew was available to us. And I'll say the intuition came first because creativity was something that, because of my experiences as a kid, I had decided, and I'm very specific with that word, it was safer to not be creative as a kid because of things I overheard adults saying about my artistic talent. And what I've come to realize is creativity and artistic talent are two very different things, though they are related. But I went forward in life from about the age of 8 or 10 saying I'm not creative. And so I didn't do anything creative. And then as I'm practicing, I think I've been in practice for maybe three or 4 years, again, asking the question of what more can I be doing when my patients are reaching a plateau? When I'm reaching a plateau, knowing that we've done a lot of good with chiropractic and with what's available with chiropractic, but still recognizing there was something more available to us. And one of the first things that came to me was that under the underlying physical cause that we know we address through the nervous system in chiropractic, there's other things underlying that, of course, being emotional, mental, spiritual. Um, and I'm going to leave it broad like that. And so wondering how to bring that into it. As I was asking these questions, never really finding like a definitive answer, what I noticed in my practice is that patients would come in and there were things that I was called to do that weren't related to what I knew of their physical history up for the time I've worked with them. And they weren't part of like the history they shared with me. And so there was really no logical explanation why I was going forward in the way I was with the adjustment. I know there's an example I shared with you, Cheryl, when we talked previously, a patient who comes in that I've known for months or years, I actually think it was years at that point, who I knew to check their jaw, yet they had never had a history with their jaw of an issue. They didn't mention anything with their jaw. I found something pretty significant. I adjusted it, and they get up going, "Why did you do that?" And I'm like, honestly, I don't know. I just knew I was meant to. And they said, well, my jaw locked up for hours over the weekend. I wasn't sure what to do, and I forgot to tell you about it. And now you're adjusting my jaw. And those types of stories or those types of experiences happened more and more. And I had to pay attention to them because they weren't explained by my experience and education with chiropractic up to that point. They weren't part of my regular analysis. And yet, repeatedly, it was what was needed for my patient to achieve a new level of well, feeling good, certainly, but then it opened up other possibilities. We could see that plateau that we had come up against raise and expand in really interesting ways. But then it moved beyond that to, I knew what questions to ask, and I knew what statements to make. And again, things that were not necessarily related to what was going on. I had a woman she was in her 60s, I want to say late 60s, and she was having an issue with her ankle. And I knew her as a grandmother, I knew her as a mother, and as a woman who worked from home, taking care of the house, taking care of her kids and her grandkids. And after not getting the sustained results, I mean, she'd get relief, but it would come back over time. One day I remember asking her about playing softball. And again, nothing that I ever would have guessed about her and what I didn't know of her. And it actually wasn't her playing softball, but it was an event or an experience that she had at a softball game decades prior, that when we addressed it, when she answered it, again, seemed to unlock something within her. And physically, things started shifting, but also emotionally and mentally, things started shifting. And again, I couldn't ignore it. Mm-hmm. So I'm here today talking about intuition and creativity because I did close my physical chiropractic, my full-time chiropractic practice in 2019. And I feel like the timing of that, well, I couldn't have planned it if I tried, but I was called to close my practice in 2019, January of 2019 specifically, after ignoring coaches, ignoring people around me going, don't do that, like don't close your practice. But I knew it, my intuition, everything said, close it and close it now. Of course, a little more than a year later, we have the COVID pandemic, we have the quarantine, people scrambling to pivot. I had already done it. Mm. Not to say that there wasn't stress, but when people were trying to figure out how to continue to practice, can they continue to practice depending on the state they were in, because in some states it wasn't legally allowed, I was still working because I had already pivoted. I had already transitioned to working virtually with people and had been doing it consistently for more than a year. So I was in a position to be able to support people through that time period where now, you have patients who are going, well, what do I do if I can't get chiropractic care? What do I do if I can't get, whether it's massage, acupuncture, all those things that normally they would leave their home to receive? I was available to do that for them from the safety of their own home. And it's because I listened to my intuition and made this huge life-changing decision to close my practice after going to school for all those years to become a doctor of chiropractic. And now not only am I not putting my hands on people, I'm not seeing them physically. So
that's incredible. So how did you, where does the intuition come from to give you that inner compass to be able to have enough faith in yourself and faith in the message to be able to close down your practice? It's a big deal to open a practice, and it's a bigger deal to close it.
Right. And one of the things that I want to say, I don't regret closing it. There's been different times for various reasons. Somebody would say, well, you can just open another practice. And I'm like, oh, no, like I can't even imagine doing it. Last week I spent the week with my best friend and I worked from another state, and I can do that because I don't have a physical practice that I have to do the adjustments, that I have to be in the state of North Carolina to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And so there's so many things that have opened up to me because I did close my practice that weren't available when I was practicing. Where does it come from? We all have intuition. We all have this ability that I'm talking about to receive information, to receive wisdom, and to understand it and to respond to it. It's whether or not I'll say, on some level, set ourselves up to have the space to hear it. Mm-hmm. There was a shift that I had made in my practice prior to my intuition really showing itself. And I had learned some different techniques that were less like analysis based from the perspective of, check this, and if you get this response, then you do this, and less hierarchical. And it allowed a more of a variety of questions. It allowed me to look at other perspectives. And what I realized is, because I was not following like the strict checklist in my head, there was more space. And it was that space that allowed like this information, like checking somebody's jaw or asking about softball or, making certain statements to patients. It was that space that allowed that information to come in more consistently. Because when I look back on it, what I realized is information had been coming to me for a long time, but it was sporadic. It was intermittent. So I didn't recognize the pattern of it. I didn't recognize the consistency that it could be available to me until all of a sudden I had more space. More space in my thinking, and more space that I wasn't filling with listening to podcasts or listening to music or, something where, so many of us, because we have devices that we literally can carry around with us, that there's constant information that we're listening to. And I'll say to people now, like, when do you get inspiration? One of the consistent times people will say is in the shower, because it's probably a time that maybe we're not listening to a podcast, that we're not listening to something else. And so that space is available. And so that, I would say, is one of the most important things. Is there space? Don't fill every moment with somebody else's knowledge and wisdom. Give yourself the space to hear your own, because that's what part of intuition is. And I say part because I do believe it is our inner wisdom, and that's why it's available to all of us. But I believe it's our inner wisdom connected to that which is bigger than ourself. It's our inner wisdom connected to the energy of the universe. It's our inner wisdom connected to nature. I often say it's inner wisdom and all that is. So again,
so would you recommend that? So, I mean, I know that you check in a lot throughout the day, many, many, many times. But for somebody that is still like trying to understand this intuition and the creativity and the space of being able to listen and hear these things, or feel these things, what would you recommend is a good cadence to kind of give yourself that space? Either take a walk in nature or take more showers, or what is a good cadence to kind of just start?
Well, with what you can be consistent with, I often suggest to people, in some of the conversations that I've had in the past when that question's been asked, is start with something that you can do, that you're willing to do. I do recommend, ideally, I would say, having a conversation with yourself, because that's the way I imagine it. That's the way I approach it. Is that it's a conversation with myself, with my inner wisdom, and that you want to do that at least once a day. And I say it that way because imagine if you live with somebody, imagine going through that entire day and not having a conversation with them. I mean, it feels strange. We can't imagine it. We can't imagine having a relationship without at least like touching base. Well, we want to do that with ourselves. We go through our day saying, hey, how are you? How many times do we do that in the course of a day? And of course, it varies depending on how many people we see or pass, but it's regular. But yet again, how often do we stop and ask ourselves, hey, how are you? And then listen. So, I tell people, I'm like, and they're like, well, what does that look like? I mean, it literally looks like hey, Jen. And I often put my hand on my chest, just again to ground into that and take that space, that breath with that. And I go, how are you? You know, before I got on this call, I did that because I wanted to be at my best on this call. So I stopped and I was like, anything you need before we start this? And it was just like, just take a break and read something for fun. So,
Okay.
there's a couple of books that I have, and it was just like, just do that, like kind of disconnect, because, of course, my mind wanted to get in, I'll say in the way, because it wanted to say like, ooh, you gave Cheryl some topics, but are you really going to talk about that? And what, like all the what ifs that can happen when our mind gets involved, trying to plan and prepare and solve problems that aren't even there. So it's just like, take a break, step back, and read for a few minutes. Right. Yes, it allows, again, the space. It allows the energy to come down, allows me to be in my body and get out of my head.
I think that's a big deal for a lot of us that have gone to school for so long, to step away from what's going on in our head. Mm-hmm. And the protocols. And I wrote down scientific protocols. So what we're talking about today is beyond those scientific protocols. Must do this. This means this flow chart says over here. Now we come down to here. Oh, but it's beyond that. And you mentioned something early on where you said you were safer. It was safer not to be creative, but now you're in a space where you can be creative. So what was that safer shift?
The safer shift, well, it came from the healing that I've made healing my priority. Of course, as a chiropractor, our goal is to help others heal. And I'm sure if you talk to a lot of chiropractors, what do you do to take care of yourself? Some are like, oh, yes, my healing, my health is a priority, and for others, not so much. They get caught in whatever else.
Sure, life.
So, healing is absolutely one of my number one priorities for myself, whether that be physical, emotional, spiritual, or mental. My health and well-being is number one. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is recognizing that my inner wisdom is the most important wisdom. Yes, I can take advice. Yes, I can listen to experts. Yes, I can, go to experts for my overall health and well-being, or for whatever reason. But whatever comes to me, I'm going to filter through my inner wisdom. Mm-hmm. And I say it that way because my decision as a kid to not be creative was because I didn't like how I felt when I heard the way people were talking about me. Mm. I didn't like that they said it was bad, that I sounded awful, or that it was ugly. All these things that I took very personally. And now I'm in a place that I can share my creativity with me first, because it had to happen with me first. Mm-hmm. And then again, my intuition played a big part of it, because there was a weekend event I was going to. It had all these offerings, a lot I was not interested in, and the rest of them made me uncomfortable. And it was because they were creative in nature. Mm. And I was like, okay, and of course by this point I've learned to check in with my intuition, and it was like, am I doing this? Because the offerings came in columns, and it was like, nope. And I'm like, oh, and when I'm looking at all the descriptions going, oh my God, I can't believe I'm even considering this. And I check in. Yep. Okay. My intuition says yes. So I set the intention. At that point, I had to narrow it down. Everyone that made me uncomfortable in a time slot were the ones I was going to do. The first one involved singing, and it was Raising Appalachia is the name of the band. They travel around the country, and it was one of their women who was God, I can't talk. I'm so excited about all of this because I love when people like get into intuition and into creativity that I could talk about it all day. But I was going to this and I'm listening to them, and we were just starting to sing a few notes. And as I'm singing these few notes, I literally burst into tears. And at that point, like all these memories came up of how much I enjoyed being creative as a kid. All these experiences, I mean, I could like literally see myself creating and drawing and, being out in nature and just the awe behind all of it. And of course, that continued to happen through the course of the weekend because many of the things that made me uncomfortable, which I didn't understand at the time, were around being creative.
Okay.
Again, there was something that when I checked in, it was like, do these things. And it was after that I was processing it, going, wow, they were all creative. I forgot. But part of the tears that were coming in was, I remembered that was me. Being creative is me. And so that was the big, like, pivotal moment where it was not just intuition anymore. The creativity piece started to come in. And I mean, one of the ways that my creativity is felt and expressed is through art, but another way is through healing. I never know what I'm going to say to somebody in the course of healing. And I have to allow creativity to come in because I have to allow, at this point, I think I'm a better healer. I know I'm a better healer because I allow myself to think outside of those scientific parameters that were like trained into us, educated into us, like follow these things, especially if you want to cover your ass and, not open yourself up to potential lawsuits and all kinds of other things. Yeah, I mean, so you have to have that willingness to see what other perspectives are open to you, to allow other perspectives, to not automatically shut them down because they don't fit into scientific parameters, or because they make you uncomfortable, or because you're looking at it going, what? Like, either I don't believe in this. Well, it's like, you didn't believe in this. And you're not sure that you still do, but that doesn't mean it's not a possibility. There are things that have come out of my mouth, whether it be about past lives or ancestors, or, I'm thinking of, like dragons, and, I have somebody that I'm talking to who sees things come out of their wall. Are they crazy? No, they're not. Their experience of the world is different. And some people might say they're crazy. But yet here's somebody who has a successful, like, exploding business, who is raising like happy, healthy kids, who has a happy, so no, it's just different than what we've experienced or what we've come to believe and know. And that's where creativity comes in. Anything that we do to expand our creativity allows us to see even more perspectives than we would, at least that's my belief, than we would otherwise. Does that make sense?
Sure does. Sure does. You've touched on a couple things. I've got questions. I keep writing notes, so I'm writing lots of questions. So hopefully we'll get back to some of the other ones, but I want to move on to something that you just said. So talking to a client or a patient that might be seeing things coming out of the wall could sound maybe schizophrenic or something that is a mental health illness that could be detrimental to somebody's physical being on this planet. Right. Or it could be intuition. How do you know the difference between something that is pathological versus something that is spiritual intuition?
Well, How do I answer that? I had a similar question from a client this morning. They wanted to know the difference between intuition and all the other voices that they hear.
Okay, yeah.
Certainly questions are a part of it. Certainly an assessment is a part of it, especially as a doctor.
Right.
I am still a licensed doctor. There are still parameters that I have to practice by, that I have to be aware of. And there are times that, the doctor part of me is like, this would be the conversation. And the intuitive psychic part of me, this is a different conversation. And, if I'm dealing strictly with a chiropractic patient, the conversation is going to be this. Now, if they're somebody who is more operating on this side, and certainly the virtual work I do tends to operate on this side, then the conversation, I'm probably going to include both, depending on my relationship with them. There are things that my number one priority is, are they safe? That's always going to be my number one priority. When people come to me and they're questioning, well, not just mental health, but physical health. I have this pain and I'm here in North Carolina and somebody's in California. And, like my first question is, what questions do I need to ask to feel confident that they're safe in this moment? And if I get yes, then the conversation can move on from there. So I want to put that out there first, even for the people who come to me going, "Ooh, can I say this to you? Because you might think I'm crazy," because they've had conversations with others who that's been the response. And it can be about seeing things come out of the wall, but it can also be, I have thoughts of suicide, but I know I'm not suicidal. And I know that like it's an option in unlimited options. And it's one that's come up. And they want to talk about it. And they don't want it to go down that route of, all the questions that, that they've been asked before to make sure that they're not about to go commit suicide. And so it tends to shut down, at least in my experience with the people I've talked to, like a real conversation about, well, what does this mean for you? Or why is this coming up as the option that's like letting itself known? Like you've made it clear. And, that's one of my questions. Like, are you thinking about doing it? Do you have a plan for doing it? We know those questions.
Sure.
So again, wanting to make sure that they're safe.
I think that's a powerful space to be in. I think that, we all have a start date and an end date, whether we like it or not. We have an end date. And if you're not thinking about that, some people just want to ignore it until it happens, but other people are curious and we want to know. And if you haven't thought about that, I think you're shutting down some of that creativity and some of that intuition piece of it. In my opinion, this is strictly my opinion.
I would agree.
So being able to talk about suicide or end of life or other scenarios in a safe place can be really empowering for some people, I'm sure, because it's not judged in such a negative manner. It's more of a, let's open the box and see what's inside.
Well, because it, and there's a quote, and it's maybe it'll come by the time we're done talking, that I'm thinking of, but I think of it as like a detox. Many of us have done a physical detox. We want to get that poison, that stuff that's not good for us out of our body. Our body automatically does something like that. If we ingest something, for instance, that's not good for us, that is poison, our body is going to respond and it's going to get it out. And so often, when it comes to mental health, emotional health, we're not always given the space and the time to have those conversations or to feel safe to have them with the person that you sought, who is an expert, or you sought for guidance. They might not be comfortable with it. Or again, they're so locked into like how we've been educated and trained that it's like it goes here and it again shuts down a lot of that conversation. So I think I see it as it's an opportunity to detox. You know, when somebody can say, you know, suicide is an option, or it comes up, even though I know I'm not suicidal, there's something there. There's something that's ready to be looked at. There's something that's ready to be healed. And not everybody is able to hold a space or be able to facilitate that conversation, or ones like it. And then we end up again getting locked into things like this is mental health and this is like an illness. And yes, you know, I work with people who have and are spending, you know, time in locked mental health wards for their own safety. But I also work with people, like I mentioned, who see things. And just because I might not see things come out of my wall doesn't mean it's not, I don't want to say not normal, but it's not normal. It's just not our experience. I know I'm kind of going around with that. But I'll say it this way. My goal is for safety, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual safety. And I want to create the space to have conversations and to talk about these different areas and provide support and guidance for people to not only feel safe, but to be able to express who they fully are. And in some cases, that means a mental health diagnosis. In some case, it might mean hospitalization, at least for the time being. But I would say that those times are fewer than you'd imagine. Again, I think it goes back to that safe space that I know I can have this conversation. Like people know that, and I say this from the first time I meet them, there's nothing off limits. Like there's no conversation that's off limits. And people are like, oh, but I could surprise you. And I'm like, you know, I find that hard to believe at this point. And I have to say, I haven't had anybody surprise me in years.
Okay.
Not with what they share, because there's too much that I hear that, and I say here, there's too much that I receive in information or that comes out of my mouth and I'm like, where the hell did that come from? And I see all this magic stuff happen and all these really like cool levels of healing and these ahas that, like, whom am I to question what you see and understand when I'm getting all of this stuff that, again, I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's opened my life and has guided me to support others in opening their lives in really spectacular ways. I know some people, I mean, you know, how many times as a chiropractor have we been called quacks? You know, then I add intuitive to like my work, and you know, the quack comes back, you know, and then I add psychic to my work and the quack comes back, you know, or I add like I can talk to dead people, you know. I mean, it's all, I mean, you know, on some level it's all relative. It's all what you believe, what you experience, and what you've decided is, you know, is true for you.
Interesting. And this is, I always find these conversations fascinating.
I know.
So as you're receiving this wisdom, as you're getting downloads, if you will, how do you know that you've made an impact for someone?
Well, that's a great question. You know, thinking back to the conversation I had with one of my clients this morning, you know, I started working with her a little bit more than 6 months ago, and I have not ever met her in person, She does live in California. She was experiencing 10 out of 10 pain every day. She's been seeing a therapist for years. She's gone to numerous doctors. Nobody's been able to help her. And she was just miserable. And she happened to hear me. There's a conversation I used to hold on Clubhouse every week about anger. And she reached out to me with a question, and we ended up getting on a call much like this. And she decided to work with me. As we moved through, and when we hit the 6 months mark, I revisited a question with her that I had asked at numerous times, wanting to make sure we're on track and moving forward in the direction she wanted to go. And one of her goals was to move through her day and enjoy her day without pain. So I asked her, okay, what's your pain level right now? 0. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being excruciating, how much pain are you in right now? 0. Okay, when you started with me, did you ever go a day without pain? She goes, no, never. I never was not in pain. Okay. So I'm like, when was the last time you had pain? She's like, well, a few days ago. She was like, there was like some pain. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate that? She's like, a 1, maybe a 2. I said, okay, how long did it last? Oh, 30 minutes. Okay. And have you been in pain since then? No. Okay, when we started 6 months ago, you're telling me you were never without pain. I said, how low on the scale of 1 to 10 did your pain level get? She's like, oh, it never got below a 5 or 6. I said, so you were always in pain, at least at a 5 or 6 every day, 24 hours a day? She said, yes. I said, was that with medication? Was that with, she's like, yes. And so in this case for her, it was physical pain is one of the ways that we measured that she's making progress.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the ways. Now, there was a number of other ways. Now, of course, there are people that I work with who are not in physical pain, or that's not the primary complaint that they have. I have somebody else who's in Georgia, and they are in emotional pain. And the way they described it is they woke up every day like dreading the day. And so now my question to them is, how do you wake up? Like, how'd you wake up today? And it's like, I woke up today looking forward to today. Okay, when was the last time that you dreaded waking up and dreaded the day ahead of you? And if they go back and look in their journal, they can give me a date, but it's been more than 3 months.
Awesome.
So when I start working with somebody, we set goals, much like chiropractic, we're going to set goals for range of motion or, ability to, move in a way or to do something without pain or not to have pain, whatever the case might be. We're going to set those goals, do the same thing with this, and we're going to measure them. We're going to check in on them. We're going to make sure that we're meeting or exceeding those goals. Otherwise, we've got to reevaluate. Often, one of the first things we reevaluate is recognizing they didn't set their goals high enough, or they didn't set them expansive enough because they recognize, oh, that's changing. Or, you know what? I was hoping to get this. And even though I haven't achieved this yet, I recognize I'm no longer going to settle for that. I'm going for this. And it's things like that say the work that I'm doing is having an impact. The work that I'm doing is making a difference. And that the people who I'm working with recognize that they're capable of far beyond what they imagined. And it's those things that say it works and that we're on track.
Yeah. I think that that's empowering for a lot of people to hear that we set our goals so small and we're capable of so much. And I think that, well, maybe you could answer this. What do you think some of the keys are to unlocking that realization that now my goals are too small and I no longer will accept this. This is what I'm targeting now. How do you think people shift that? How do
Well,
you help them shift to that?
one of the first things that in working with me that we address is the agreement or the belief that I am safe within myself. That's sitting in my office here, that I am safe. And what does that feel like from the inside out? And then cultivating that energy, that agreement into all areas of my life, that it's a practice, that I have a choice about and it's that allows people to, I think, it's a foundation, absolutely a foundation of what we do, that allows people to step outside their comfort zone. Mm-hmm. We know about the nervous system as a chiropractor. We talk about the nervous system and our body's response when something's scary, when something's unknown. And that signal is to whoa, it tends to be to step back. Maybe that's not a good idea. I mean, it's not like life or death, like with a saber-toothed tiger. It's not life or death, but yet our body physiologically is still responding that way. So we want to teach it how to be safe moving forward in a way that we're choosing to move forward. Mm-hmm. I had somebody say to me today, and it was interesting. I wrote it down now that we're talking about this. She said to me, she's like, you help people to face a side of change that doesn't feel safe. And I was like, huh. Because, other people have made changes that they never, well, they hoped. Maybe they hoped that they would get there, but they didn't feel confident about it. And so I help people navigate. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. I help people navigate change. I help people feel safe to look at those things that they never imagined looking at. And they might not even be aware of what those things are.
Sure.
It's those things that they've, compartmentalized, that they've blocked off, that they, I'm going to focus on the positive, or I'm going to, I'm just not going to pay attention to it. And maybe it'll go away. And maybe there'll be enough here that will allow me to move forward with the way I want. But that becomes a weight. That becomes the energetic drag of what it takes for us to contain these things is a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
So do you feel like that shift is, do you think the physical drives the emotional, or is the emotional drives the physical, or is there some kind of magic stew that all happens at the same time?
Well, it is absolutely all integrated. And it, where the lock is varies from person to person. For some people, I might be having a conversation with them about their 6-year-old self. With somebody else, I might be having a conversation with them about their relationship with their father, as they were growing up. With somebody else, I might be looking at ancestral patterns or past life patterns. In some cases, and I think of a licensed therapist I work with, and with her, consistently, I would say, every time I see her in a session, it's like, have you had fun since I saw you last? Okay. Because for her, if she's not having fun, there's things that she's shutting down. When she's having fun, so many things open up for her. So for her, like that's her key, is the fun. And so it's a red flag if she looks back and goes, oh yeah, no, I haven't. Mm. So it varies on the best way or to access that lock.
Okay.
Yeah, we're all getting there. I mean, on some level, we're all getting there. We're all moving, we're all moving in a direction. I won't say forward because it's not necessarily forward. Yeah. But we're all moving in a way based on the decisions that we're making. And, one of the things I said to my client when we were talking about intuition today is, when it comes to our mind and it comes to intuition, our mind might get on a case, might be like in some way because we didn't do what our mind told us to do. Our intuition's not going to do that because our intuition on some level recognizes we're going to get there. Okay. Even if our intuition said, go this way. We might not have listened for whatever reason, or we might have missed that window. We dragged our feet enough that now that opportunity is passed. But the intuition goes, nope, you didn't pay attention to me. Like, I'm done. Our mind can do that sometimes. Sometimes people in our lives can be like, nope, you didn't listen to me. Like, but our intuition is going to be like, okay, like, here's where we are. What's next?
So our intuition doesn't give up on us and still always wants us to be at our optimum. Mm-hmm. That's cool to have something, always just like, come on, you could do it.
Yeah. At least that's been my experience, and that's my belief. At this point, I've never associated. Yeah, because again, those thoughts, those things that that judgment, that criticism. Mm-hmm. It's not like they're new thoughts. It's not like they're things we haven't heard like for years.
Sure.
Those repeating patterns of our mind, again, most likely trying to keep us safe, trying to keep us in a place that's known, that's comfortable. Our intuition is going to help us step outside our comfort zone. It's going to help us step outside the limits that often our upbringing, our education, our experiences have created limits that, yes, as a 5-year-old kept us safe, as a 10-year-old kept us safe, but that we don't need as a 30, 40, 50 plus year old. We don't need them anymore, but they're still operating.
So some people call this this level of like the mind continually beating us down, our repeated actions in a certain direction. Some people talk about this as a vibration, or a level in which we are exhibiting emotion and functionality in the space that we're in. Mm-hmm. So does that make sense to you, the vibration term?
Absolutely.
Can you describe that a little bit further as far as what does that mean to be able to elevate your vibration?
Well, sometimes we can just choose. I mean, if you think about it, if you're having a day that is just like, you might have woken up that way or something might have happened that just sets the tone for the day and it feels heavy, and it feels like a lot. One of the things that I have done and still do, I'll be like, okay, I have a choice about this. I can allow this to continue to run its course like it is, or I can shift it. And I know that one of the ways to shift it might be I'm going to turn on one of my playlists on my music, I'm going to turn that speaker up, and I'm going to start moving and dancing through my house. I'm probably there are probably songs I can sing along with as I'm doing it. And, it makes me think of that song, like Dance Like Nobody's Watching. I'm just going to let it go. And when I shut that music off to be like, okay, now it's time to get back into my schedule, be doing something specific. My energy vibration, my vibration is going to be up. It's going to be different. Now, choosing to change our vibration is not always the right thing to do, or the healthy thing to do, or the most loving thing to do.
Okay, tell me more.
Because sometimes what is healthy and loving and best for me is to feel what I'm feeling, even though it doesn't feel good. Sometimes, I can compare it to a chiropractic adjustment. There are some areas that are subluxated, but we choose not to adjust them because we know we're adjusting the compensation, or another way to put it might be, we know we can provide some physical relief as far as the pain and discomfort, but long term, that's not, like, the adjustment's not going to hold if we keep adjusting that particular area. And the people are going to continue to engage in the patterns that have that pain showing up in the first place. And I can think of a patient that I had. She actually was a office manager for another chiropractic office, and she wanted me to move this thoracic bone. And I did my assessment, and everything said no, like, no, don't adjust this. And so I had a conversation with her, and I said, can you trust me? I said, give me, and I gave her a time frame. I'm like, give me this much time. And if this doesn't change, I said, we'll adjust it. She called me 2 days later and goes, it's changed. And then she called me like 4 days later, and she says, it's still not back. She's like, I've been getting adjusted like 3 times a week for years to get relief from this pain and discomfort. So sometimes we need like that message, or we need that energy to get to a different level of healing. Same thing with our vibration. Sometimes we need to be angry. Sometimes we need grief, or we need whatever that is to make true change. And so that's why I say it can be as easy as making a choice to change our vibration, but that's not always best. And that's where intuition comes in. One of the things that I say to people, again, a different client today, I said, did you ask what your body needed? We've got so much advice. We've got so much information out there. If these things happen, you're going to ice, or you're going to heat, or you're going to elevate, or you're going to take this medication, or, you're going to get rest, or whatever the case might be. But is that what your body needs in this moment? Probably the most pivotal moment in all of this, whether it's intuition or creativity, was I was working with a softball player, and she had had multiple injuries. And part of it in my mind was because she wasn't listening to my advice and the advice of the other experts that she was working with. And she was getting back to playing much sooner than I ever would have recommended. And so again, I said to her, can you give yourself this time to like truly heal? And, again, little bit of improvement. I'm like, okay, we're getting in the right direction. And then for various reasons, I wasn't going to see her for a matter of like, I want to say it was like 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And she came into the office and she was moving so good. And I said, yay, it's like it worked. I said, so what'd you do? Like all these things that we've been talking about paid off. She's like, no. She's like, last time I left here, she was like, I was like, screw it. I'm not listening to any of y'all. She's like, I'm going to do my own thing. And she's like, I went back to playing. And she's like, I haven't ever felt this good. I was like, huh. It was that thing. Now, it was that thing that had me recognize how important it is for a person to be able to listen to their own intuition, to be able to listen to their own inner wisdom, and not rely only on experts. Because and like we know, again, we've got those scientific parameters. And all the research in the world can say for 55, for 65, for 85% of people, like this is, the recommended course of care. Mm-hmm. We don't know if they're part of that 55, 65, 85%. They might be part of that like 2% that doesn't fit anywhere. And so how do we guide them to be able to ask the questions that their body wants to answer and then hear the response? And that's what intuition and creativity allows me to do for me, but also how I guide others to be able to do that for themselves.
Okay, fantastic. That makes sense. So I don't want to go too much further because we're almost at an hour. And then time's just going like that. So you did mention ancestral patterns, and I'm curious, when we talk about listening to your own wisdom and your own intuition, do the ancestral patterns play into that wisdom, or is that a separate thing? Is that a separate entity?
I would say nothing separate, not truly separate. And I would say nothing separate. And I'm checking in to make sure like that it's not my mind like going with an automatic response. Okay, and I am getting yes, that nothing is truly separate. Ancestral patterns play a part. Well, and I'm getting yes, and I'm getting like a wholehearted yes. I like to qualify my yeses, and so I'm getting like 90% plus yes. Nothing's absolute. And who we are on some level literally comes from the DNA. So we can't not have ancestral patterns. Okay. I would say where, ancestral patterns can be interesting is.
Can you define what an ancestral pattern is first?
Okay, an ancestral pattern might be, okay. I'm trying to make sure I don't use examples that people know are other people's examples.
You can use me. That's okay.
No, so it's for instance, if you look at beliefs in your family, like religion passed down from generation to generation. You've got some people who wholeheartedly may believe in the religion, that stand by the religion, that they embrace it in every way. Then you're going to have some people who they go to church, but they go to church on Sunday, but what they do outside of church is like a very different thing. Then you've got some people who don't do it. But whether or not generation after generation chooses to go to church or go to the same church, to stay with the same beliefs, is going to have impact on future generations. So that is like one way. I think of my own parents, for instance. Both my parents were raised by strict parents who were raised by strict parents. And my mom said, I don't want this for my kids. My dad said, this is a great way to raise the kids. Mm-hmm. And of course that in itself, butted heads, caused a lot of confusion, certainly for me, as far as why is it this way at this time and this way at another time. And now I can understand that more, but I can look back too, when I know more about my grandparents and my great-grandparents and beyond, why those patterns came down the way they did. Part of it was for survival. Mm-hmm. So that can be a way that ancestral patterns can come in. I happen to have a wife who loves genealogy, so I know more about, my ancestors than others might, but we can still address some patterns even if we don't know details. But patterns of addiction, or patterns of like cultural patterns that get passed down from ancestors. Again, I think of my dad's side of the family. My dad, he was born in the United States. His parents were, but beyond that, they were born in Canada and other parts of the world. When they first came to the United States, fitting in was important. Speaking, the language as other people spoke it was important. My great grandmother never spoke English. And I can remember the times that I would interact with her. My meme would, speak French, but French on a daily basis was never spoken, because it was, we come in and we're going to fit in. Sure. We're coming in and we've got to show up a certain way. So how that can impact who we are, is a thing too. So those are a couple of ways that ancestral patterns can impact who we are. It's a history of denying who we are, of not being able to fully express who we are. Again, part of it can be because it's not safe.
Sure.
Certainly not comfortable.
Mm-hmm. So the examples that you gave were of, I guess, the physical realm, of more of like we can trace this back in journals or history books. Now, does ancestral pattern or patternry, however you'd like to say it properly, does that also exist in the intuitive world, or in the non-physical? Like, I can't flip a book and say this happened, and oh, this was for survival, and I understand that. Is there more of a spiritual side to ancestral patterns?
Absolutely. Part of the reason I chose the physical ones to share is because, especially if this is new for people who are listening in any way, it's easier to be able to trace something, to be able to go, okay, yes, I can see how this would have impact. Even if you go from an alcoholic generation to like the next generation's like, oh no, we don't touch alcohol at all, because of what my grandparents or my parents did. But there's still that addiction pattern. But yes, let me see, emotional, spiritual, let me see if there's an example. Okay. Of, girls raised to behave, to be polite, to do what they're told. Mm-hmm. There's, and again, if you look, certainly if you're able to, there might always be one or two, when you look back, like they stood out in some way, they were going to do their own thing. I know for myself, I wanted a role model of a woman in my lineage that did that. Mm-hmm. Well, at the same time, recognizing, again, for where and how my grandparents and great-grandparents grew up, it was safer to kind of be invisible, to do what you were told, to not stand out. But I was looking for, a standout for me, because I didn't want to be one more person who was invisible. Mm-hmm. So there's also, I'll say it this way too. There are emotional patterns that, you might hear somebody say, oh, you're so much like your aunt or your uncle, or you're so much like so-and-so. And it's not that you look like them. It's that there's personality traits that like are standing out or that come out. And this is too where, I mean, and we can go off on this forever, where epigenetics comes in too, because, one of the things that my mom said to me a few years back was I reminded her of my great aunt Doris, except my great aunt Doris was my great grandfather's second wife. I mean, we're not related by blood, but I reminded her because I asked questions. My great aunt Doris would ask questions. And of course, in her generation, that was like, again, women didn't ask questions. You did what you were supposed to. And she stood out as asking questions. Where I grew up as a kid, I asked a lot of questions, and you didn't do that. So we do see things pop up. And some of those things can be great. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll say on some level, all of those things can be great. There are reasons. And I'll say it. There's a saying that somebody shared with me some years ago, gifts can come in shitty wrapping paper. And sometimes what makes me who I am is because of something that got passed down from previous generations, that to look back at it might not be so great. Mm-hmm. But yet, overall, I like who I am.
I like
I'm happy with who I am. So, if I see like stoicism, as like a history, as a pattern in my ancestry, and I'm like, like even the picture I shared with you, I got a big smile. I'm like, yay, because that's how I'm choosing to be me. On some level, out of pattern with what occurred in previous generations.
Do you feel like I told you I was gonna like kind of wrap this up, and then I asked another question, right? So do you feel like you're being congruent with your true self when you're like, yes, or do you feel like those patterns were more congruent and now you're stepping outside into this uncomfortableness?
No, I mean, it certainly, there has been a lot of uncomfortableness around it, but no, it's me being me.
Good for you.
That's, unapologetically me. That's the energy that I want to embrace on a daily basis, is just being me. Mm-hmm. And not feeling like I have to apologize for it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and be an asshole, it's not anything like that, but it's, it is showing up and taking up space and, and laughing and being silly and saying I'm intuitive and saying I'm psychic. And even though for other people, like, that's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have to choose to have conversations with me. You don't have to choose to like listen to this. And it's okay if you don't. But hey, we enjoy this conversation. Obviously, we can go on and on and on about it. And it can lead to like another question and another thought. And, never know where it's going to take us. And yet, if you stop and ask yourself right now, like, how does this conversation, you talked about vibration earlier, like, how does this conversation vibrate for you right now? Is it like a high vibration or is it a low vibration?
Yeah, I think it's high because it's interesting, it's fascinating, and I think me personally, I love personal development. I love learning about myself. Mm-hmm. I love learning about what makes me authentic and true mm-hmm. to that intuitive yes feeling. Mm-hmm. And anything that can promote that, I think, is a good thing for not only me, but mm-hmm. anybody else that's willing to step into that space. Some people don't want to, and that's totally fine. But for those of us that do want to step in and be our authentic selves and be at our optimum, mm-hmm. I think it's a cool place to be.
Well, and the other thing that popped up is, I feel like there's a part of us that says, and this is where possibilities are. This is where that untapped potential can like come out and play, mm-hmm. and come out and, check things out when it might have been a little hesitant before. That's one of the reasons I love this conversation, is because I feel like these conversations, I feel like it's permission. It's permission from me and anybody else who's listening to be like, what do I really want? Like, how do I really want to be experiencing, my life? And what do I really want to be creating for my life?
Yes. Yes, and reflecting on that and then taking appropriate action. And I think that this conversation for me, as a reflection of some of the things that we talked about, I think one of the biggest things that I struggle with is taking up space, and this is helping me take up some space. Maybe it's only a little teeny tiny little micro space on Facebook, but it's taking up space. And if nobody watches it, that's okay, because I'm still stepping into it and taking up space. And I've always shied away from space, like make myself as small as possible, quiet as possible. Don't make any waves. Just it's okay. But you know what? It's not getting me anywhere, damn it. And truly, like, I have something to say. So stepping into it and taking up space is something that I appreciate that you're allowing me to do, just by having you on and talking about the stuff that you're vibrating at a very high level.
I am like, woohoo. Yes. I want to wrap up this way, and then I'll let you wrap up, but I am looking at the time too, and I've got to go, but I'll say it this way: everything that we do to heal ourselves, everything that we do to know, love, and understand ourselves, when we heal ourselves, we heal the world. That energy, this energy ripples. It has an impact. Again, just like we've heard stories with chiropractic, that the guy who used to be an asshole is no longer an asshole, because, they get adjusted and they're feeling better and their nervous system is functioning. And, how they show up and experience the world changes, and that impacts others. Same thing with this. Every time we do something to heal, whether it's with intuition, whether it's with creativity, whether it's a chiropractic adjustment, we are healing the world. We are changing the world, and it's doing good. It's doing good.
Yay for good.
Well, thank you for this.
My pleasure. Thank you. Is there a great way that people can get a hold of you if something's resonated and they feel like, yes, she's the right person to take me to the next level? Is it Facebook? Is it email? Is it a web address? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, certainly they can go to theintuitivephoenix.com. That is my website. I am on Facebook. I'm sure you've tagged me. People can send me a message that way as well. And of course, if you go to my website, you can email me from there. So there's lots of different ways, but those two are probably the easiest from here, going to the website or just going to the tag.
Perfect. I will make sure that information is posted below us when we're done. And for those of you in Facebook land, I'm going to pop us off, but Jen, hold on for a second and we'll chit chat afterward. So Goodbye, Facebook. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, we should be off.